Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to Tuesday, November 28th special Board of Education meeting. I would ask everybody to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Ritchie, roll call, please.
Mr. Abudrabo.
Here.
Ms. Spassford.
Here.
Mr. Casper.
Here.
Ms. Danny.
Here.
Mr. Daly. Mr. Anderson. Mr. Grasso. Ms. Pino. Mr. Pacenti.
Here. Ms. Pino today is at her school with her kids doing a feast celebration. So we wish Mr. Tardallo's wife speedy recovery for a minor surgery that she had, and hope him well. Mr. Anderson, I'm going to ask you to read the mission statement tonight, please.
Mission of the Clifton School District in a open and reciprocal community partnership is to provide all students with a quality education, to develop skills necessary to become literate, lifelong learners, or responsible and productive citizen contributing to a democratic society in an ever-changing world.
Thank you. We have the reading of the Open Public Meeting Statement. New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meeting of the public bodies at which any business affected their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with this provision of this act, the Clifton Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be publicized by having the date, time, place thereof posted in the city clerk's office, Clifton Public Library, Administration Building, Senior Citizens Nutrition Center, on cable TV, in the local press, on the district's website, and mailed to the presidents of the Parent Teachers Association. This meeting will be tape recorded in accordance with policy 0168. Tonight we'll start with public recognition, which will be one session, and then we're going to go into a presentation by our New Jersey School Board. It's an overview of our superintendent search, timelines and such, and I want to thank at this time Ms. Kathy Halua for coming and giving us the presentation. Just to let the public know, this is recorded tonight and it'll be played on our website with a link directly to the superintendent search, so everybody could be aware of where we are at the time, what's happening, and how we're proceeding through our search for a new. So the public recognition is with only one. This portion of the meeting is open to citizens of Clifton for the purpose of addressing any subject matter pertinent to and/or directly related to the operation of Clifton Public School District. Residents are requested to sign a register provided for the purpose and to state their name, address, and subject matter. Comments will be limited to 5 minutes per person. Issues raised by members of the public may or may not respond to by the board. All comments will be considered and response will be forthcoming if one appropriate. The board asks that members of the public be courteous and mindful of right of other individuals when speaking. Specifically, comments regarding students and employees of the board discovered will not be responded to by the board. Students and employees have specific legal rights afforded by the laws of New Jersey. The board bears no responsibility nor be liable for any comments made by members of the public. Members of the public should consider their comments in light of legal rights of those affected or identify their comments and be aware they are legally responsible and liable for the comment. Student Union, would you like to speak first? You're good tonight? Okay. Any members of the public would like to speak? You have 5 minutes. The microphone's to the right.
Since no one coming forward, I move to close this portion of the meeting.
Second by Mr. Grasso, second by Mr. Anderson. Okay. So, just to let again everybody know, Ms. Halua will be giving our presentation once we're done. We will be adjourning. There will be no action taken on this meeting. So at this time, the Clifton Board of Education would like to present for New Jersey School Boards the overview of Superintendent, Ms. Kathy Halua.
Thank you so much for having me. I have my slideshow. I guess you want to sit
Yeah.
on it. Okay, I'll do that all.
Just put Mr. Daly in.
Okay.
So first of all, as I begin, and again, I thank you for allowing me to come and talk to the board. It's always a pleasure to be in Clifton. I do have to commend you on this beautiful space. It is quite an honor to be here, and it is a very impressive facility you have here. So congratulations on that. And it just, I hope that the presentation is as exciting as the facility, but it might not be. In the meantime, I do want to let you know, board members, that if you have any questions, by all means, let me know. I'm pleased to answer any questions. Some of this material may be familiar to you, some may be new, but also you know I am a resource for you. So you can always reach out to me at any time with any kind of questions. You know where to reach me. And I want to see you succeed. And this is a really exciting endeavor that you are faced with. I mean, you see here, if you've been to any NJSBA things, you've heard this. The superintendent, hiring your superintendent is the most important role of the board. And when you think about why that might be, right, it's not the most important role of the board just because NJSBA says that. I think it's pretty evident, really, no matter how wonderful the board, right? No matter how phenomenal your teachers are, no matter how eager and engaged the community is, it's your superintendent who is the most important individual in driving forward student success here in the district. Whoever is sitting in that seat is the educational leader of the school district and also really of the community, right? Because the schools are the heart of the community here, and student success begins in the schools. Your superintendent is the most important individual driver of that bus. And the superintendent is the only hire of the board, right? We always say the superintendent is your one employee. So this is a pretty exciting endeavor, and I appreciate beyond words that the board wants to do it right, that you're engaging in professional development on how to do it, that you want to keep everything where it needs to be during this process that is going to affect just about everyone in your community. This may be a repeat of some knowledge because this program was presented at our workshop just last month, and we did have Clifton board members in attendance, so I'm pleased that you are to bring it back home to the board. And this was in your slide printout, so I just thought this was a kind of nice visual of where we don't want to be, right? We don't want to be alarmed or scared or anything like that, and you guys are already on the road away from that because preparation is key. You've known now that you need to hire somebody, so you are in an enviable position, and that's going to work in your favor. In the meantime, to get from spot A to spot B, where we need to go, we'll focus on three key parts of the process of finding your superintendent and installing the right person. The vacancy itself, the process from start to finish, and transition on how you set up everyone for success. So the vacancy options, as we said, you know where you're standing. You have different ways of getting to that permanent superintendency. You can start with an interim superintendent. You could start with an acting superintendent if it's super short term, but really what the name of the game is, you're looking to get a permanent superintendent in here for the next 3 to 5 years. That is the amount of the time that you are allowed to offer a superintendent a contract. It can't be 1 or 2 years, can't be 6 years. 3 to 5 years is what you are legally able to offer a successful candidate. So backing up there, an interim superintendent would be an attractive option for a short-term stay. Does the board have any ideas on where it wants to land on an interim superintendent versus a permanent? Have you thought about that? Okay. Just to give you some kind of examples where an interim might work is you may need to you'll advertise, you'll get a pool of candidates. If you're not finding anybody in the first pool or the second pool that's really the right person because you don't want to settle, you may decide that an interim superintendent is the right person to lead the district temporarily. That person does need to be a retired superintendent. That's the only person that can fulfill that particular role. And they can stay in as long as 2 years, but that's a conversation that you need to have with the board, because an interim superintendent is far different from a permanent superintendent. And there may be different things that a board wants an interim superintendent to do rather than a permanent superintendent. Really, an interim superintendent is often looked upon as a placeholder, really, because they're not going to be able to stay long enough to get a feel for the culture of the district. They can absolutely steer the ship. There are lots of very qualified and impressive interim superintendents out there. May be right for you, may not be. You'll know as the process goes forward. Acting is for a very short term, and there's a very narrow definition of who can be an acting superintendent. You may have a situation where you've got someone in mind, but you're not able to get them permanently for a certain amount of months or something like that. You may want to do an acting superintendent. That can be someone who works in the district. It can be someone who doesn't have the certification, but it will need the approval of the executive county superintendent. Okay? Again, these are options that you may need to use, you may not be. You may go right from where you are to your permanent superintendent. Also, a shared superintendent is an attractive option for some districts. This is a very large district. I don't think that that's something that the board was considering, and I would concur. So we won't spend any time on that bullet point. So your requirements for a superintendent are spelled out in statute and code. They absolutely must have the certificate for a school administrator, or a certificate of eligibility if they have not yet been a superintendent. We'll see some of those. And if they do not live in New Jersey at the time that you hire them, they need to be a resident within 1 year, just the same as all of your other staff. There is a narrow window if they are not residents currently, but they work in New Jersey, and I believe it's 7 days to go from one job to another, then they can stay as a resident of New York or Pennsylvania or whatever state they live in. That's a mighty rare occurrence, but it does happen. We mentioned the contract before. All of your new contracts do need the approval of the executive county superintendent before you vote on the appointment. Okay, so that's important to know. We have to have everything in place before you publicly vote on appointing your new superintendent. As certain as you may be about who he or she that's going to be, you have to wait until you get the green light from the county superintendent. The compensation is subject to the salary cap, which is right here, is the chart that everyone looks at. Clifton, of course, falls into that highest one, right? You've got, I believe, is it how many? Yeah. Okay, there we go. That many students. So you're clearly more than 3,000. If you are over 10,000, which I believe Clifton is, you can actually apply to the commissioner for a waiver to go higher than that particular cap. It may be approved, it may not be. Of course, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves because there's a lot of factors that the board needs to consider when it goes into offering a salary to the successful candidate. And that may be something that the board ultimately does or doesn't touch. Other options, however, if you look at that first one, district has a high school, that's an automatic $5,000 because you do have a high school here. If the superintendent is meant to serve in an additional administrative position, that's another $5,000. If they are shared with another district, that's not on the table here, though. That would translate to more money for them. Merit goals, we often get asked questions about merit goals. That's really a bargaining instrument, really. There's no requirement that a superintendent needs to be offered merit goals. The board will have a conversation as to whether or not their new superintendent should be offered merit goals. You keep in mind that when you hire someone who's coming in new to the district, especially if it's an external hire, that first year they're getting used to the culture and the climate and the lay of the land, and it's a pretty heavy load for anyone. It's lighter the more experienced your candidate is. But that first year, not sure if you want to do merit goals or not. You will know. That's another thing that you can offer successful candidates. You can offer up to 5 total. 3 of them must be quantitative. You must be able to have a number attached to them as far as when you're determining whether or not they have been achieved. And that's another 3.33% of the salary that you offer them. And to qualitative goals, right? More about culture and climate or communication or something like that. Again, those are a little bit less of a payout, 2.5% for the absolute achievement of each of those goals. So really, you can offer altogether up to just about 15% on top of the salary that the salary that is capped by the state, or what the commissioner ultimately approves. The goals, however, are non-pensionable. Okay. Any questions on that? Yes, Frank.
Now, the interim pay, there's no benefits other than their pay for an interim superintendent.
Exactly. That's correct. Okay, and the interim pay, I don't know if you can, this is a beautiful screen, by the way. I've never seen these slides bigger. So you probably can read that last line. You divide your salary by 260 days for the daily rate, okay, of what you're going to be paying them, because that's how you pay your interim. It's per diem. There is a contract involved, of course. But the process, okay? There's 3 stages to it: preparation, collection, and selection, and communication is critical throughout the whole thing, and transparency. I was very pleased to hear the words, the superintendent search portion of your website. That's a step in the right direction, absolutely. Because this is, as I mentioned before, this is an important person to your community, right? This is a very important hire. So you need to provide clear and ongoing communication to all your stakeholders throughout. There are some things that you can't share with them. Of course, you can't share names, you can't share details of your applicants, but what you can do is you can let people know what the process is and what the expected timeline is and how far along you are on that timeline, what the expectations the board has for its new hire, and also what kind of input you can get from your shareholders and what the results of gathering that input is. That's important as well. You know, being upfront about what can and can't be shared is perfectly reasonable. I don't think your public would expect, or stakeholders would expect, any kind of information that would be too that would actually compromise a candidate's confidentiality. Okay, so we have to keep that in mind. Yes?
How many candidates apply during the process when you fill out?
Yes, you can. You absolutely can. In fact, when we do our superintendent searches, we always prepare a report for our participating boards about how many applicants how many applications we received, how many are internal, how many are external, what level of education they have, and where they live. You know, so, and that's website ready or newsletter ready too. So that's good information to share. New Jersey school boards, absolutely, yes. Thanks, Larry. Okay. All right, so there's a few steps here, right? The who, what, where, when, and why, and how. This is all under preparation. You need to select a search firm or a process. You can do this by yourselves if you want to. There's no law requiring that you have to, but for a district this big and for a job this big, it's certainly understandable if you wanted to hire someone to work as a consultant with you. And then the board needs to determine just how wide of a net it's going to cast. And the sort of things that you need to consider for that is what kind of a scope you want. Are you going to entertain, you know, advertising in just local advertising, online advertising? Are you going to reach nationally? Are you going to just kind of stay within the state? Although I will tell you that with the advent of the internet and online advertising, that's not quite so much of a question anymore, because, you know, our njsba.org is available anywhere, nj.com, wherever you choose to advertise online, anyone can tap into it. And there are very motivated candidates, not just from New Jersey, but from neighboring states and maybe perhaps from far away, who would be interested in this particular job. So that kind of takes care of itself. The budget for the search process, though, is something that the board needs to put a parameter on, because vendors do cost money, and there can be a pretty big gap between one or the other. And there's other expenditures to consider, like the cost of advertising or the cost of a background check, or perhaps, you know, there's travel costs, but they're kind of rare now again with the advent of Skype and all of the online options we have for communicating with candidates remotely. Developing a timeline and a calendar, though, is absolutely crucial. That is going to keep you on task, and that is going to, almost more than anything, assure your success within a certain time frame. There's a lot of variables, right? But if we can get down, or if you can get down amongst yourselves, solid dates on the calendar, when you want to advertise, when you'll close that window for advertising, what dates can you identify as first interview dates, second interview dates, third interview dates, you will thank yourselves, trust me. It really saves a lot of headache and a lot of agita. And you start from the bottom up, really. You know what date you want your superintendent to start, so you work from there, okay? And I have a sample calendar in this presentation. Again, we mentioned getting input from the community. That's a crucial part of this process also. Now, this is a board decision. Your community has put you in these seats because your values represent them. So they trust you to make this choice. But that doesn't mean that you make it in a vacuum. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth later. And advertising is another thing to discuss. I have some thoughts on that, which I will certainly expound upon. You see our little yellow caution, board member with a relative employed in the district. I don't think there's anybody here who's conflicted, but if there is, they cannot participate in the process. But Clifton's cool, right? There's nobody who fits that description? I don't think so. All right. Okay, check with your attorney if there's any questions. Okay, so stage one, you'll select a firm or a consultant. You could do it in-house. Also, you kind of have to think about what approach you want, if you want a committee or a full board. I've facilitated searches under both methods, using a committee, using the full board. I will tell you that the committee method is more popular when you have a compressed timeline. When someone's just resigned and you have 2 or 3 months to try to fill that vacancy, a committee is a little bit more nimble, a little bit more flexible, and that's a popular choice for those situations. But if you have a longer time frame, it may be wiser to go with the full board approach, because this is a full board decision. Your full board will need to vote on who the appointment ultimately will be, and knowing the import of this decision, I'm sure all board members want to be informed about the process, as is their right, but it is the board's decision as to which way you want to go about that. You can, let's see here, hire, NJSBA, I've brought our literature, and I can answer questions about our search process, but of course, there are other vendors out there who can help you. The information that I'm giving you is applicable to any search that you do, okay, regardless of with whom you contract or if you do it by yourself. Just kind of some approximate figures on the bottom there. Really, what you're kind of focused on are the two biggies are the consultant fees and the advertising costs. Your consultant fee may already include advertising costs and may already include background checks. Oftentimes, the advertising costs are not included. And that's actually a good thing, because there are lots of different ways to approach advertising. Some boards and districts like to have the print advertising, and that can run a couple $1,000s depending on what you want and how long you want to run. Online is a very popular method of advertising now, and it's something that I'm a big believer in. If you search on your own, or if you use New Jersey school boards as a facilitator, for instance, we'll put your advertisement on our website, and we get, honestly, we get close to 2,500 hits on our superintendent job search page per month. So it's a pretty broad scope, and we put it on Facebook, we put it on Twitter, so it's shareable, and it really takes on a life of its own, and that's free. There are other online options that cost as little as $500 or less. So as you're deciding what your advertising costs are going to be, my message is that there are very economical ways of doing it that have a very wide reach. Thank you, Internet, right? But perhaps the hard copy paper is attractive to you as well. It depends on the board. It's a board decision. Background checks depends on how you're going to do this. If you do it yourself, you'll need a firm to do a background check. I think $5,000 is very high. I don't think they come near that, but we're not certain because I don't work with them directly. In a district like this, you may be already using a firm to conduct background checks on your employees, and you can use that firm as well. If you go with another vendor, you'll probably want to ask if the background check is in there. They probably use another source to do background checks, and that cost is either rolled into the package or you pay for it separately. Kind of depends, but it's a fee that you need to be aware of. Any questions on this stuff? I'm sorry I'm doing so much talking, but it is important. Okay, so dissecting preparation a little more. We're talking 12-week process perhaps all together. Our first one, select a search firm, we talked about that. Budget, develop calendar, we talked about that. Develop criteria, what is that exactly? And what is the difference between that and soliciting input? Well, the board has an idea of what they want for a superintendent. The community also has something that dovetails with that. Those are two separate things. The first is a conversation amongst yourselves and with your consultant. And the second part, getting input from your stakeholders, is between the stakeholders and the consultant or whoever is leading your search if you don't use a consultant. And those two things will determine certainly how you're going to interview your candidates, but it also may determine how you advertise your candidates. I do have a sample ad here. I'll get to it a little bit later. But we'll talk about that in detail in a couple of minutes. After that process is over, and for an advertisement, you probably want to have it out there for a good, optimally, 5 weeks, right? From the start of your advertisement to the time that the applications close. You also need some time to get all those applications together in a usable format, whether it's a printout or something online, depending on how you do it. But you'll need some time in between the close date and the time that the board meets to review all of those. Once that's done, then we move on to collection. That's really, that's kind of the fun part, right? Where you review all of the application materials for everyone who has applied, and you have a discussion amongst the board about who you'd like to bring in for first round interviews. After that, you kind of winnow the pool from there, and you do second round. And you do, I highly recommend, a third round interview. Now, during this process, you may find that after your first round interview, you want to go back to your pool and kind of pull in some more people for first rounds before you get to the second round. You might do a second round, say, you know what, there are still some people from the box or the pool of candidates that I would like to see again, you know, or I'd like to explore a little further. You can certainly do that. You need to take your time. You need to leave no stone unturned in this process. If you are feeling that there is a candidate that needs vetting, vet that candidate. If you are feeling like you've brought somebody in for 2-3 interviews and they're just not clicking, go out again, re-advertise, get another pool if necessary. This is a no-settle type of pursuit here. This is an important job. There is nothing worse than appointing a superintendent and having it not work out and having that become very evident within the first year and you've signed, you know, a 3 to 5 year contract. You know, because the contract honestly binds the superintendent to the board. Binds the superintendent to the board. The longer the contract, the more attractive it is for the candidate, and there's a reason for that. And that's something, you know, that you may want to offer a 5-year contract, depending on the level of experience and how attractive the candidate is. But just keep in mind that a longer contract is primarily in the candidate's interest. Okay. After you've gotten to your favorite candidates, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 or slightly more, then we start really narrowing the pool down. Let's assume you've done 3 interview rounds and you've got 2 candidates that you are really torn about. Well, that's where we start going into that selection box, right? Even if there's only 1 candidate that you're all agreeing on, you do need to do a comprehensive reference check. References on those that they supply you with and references that the candidate does not supply you with. You need to get a full picture of whoever's going to come in here, and really the best way of doing that, aside from the interviews, are the reference checks. Because when you're talking to someone, they're telling you all of their good points, right? Naturally, that's how you are on a job interview. But this is going to be a long-term commitment, and there's a lot of kids who are going to be reliant upon this person to advance their careers here and beyond. So you need to make sure that that person fits Clifton's culture and is what they say they are. And you can really only do that thoroughly by a reference check, a very comprehensive reference check. District visits are another attractive option. I do recommend them. And normally these are pretty much feel-good enterprises. When you've narrowed it down to one person, and you just want to make sure that they will be happy here and vice versa, they can come into your district and see what your district is all about. Generally, you arrange that with your outgoing superintendent. Whom they will visit is kind of a discussion that the board should have with the outgoing superintendent. The outgoing superintendent will be able to shed some very valuable light on that from their perspective. But you typically meet with department heads, visit a classroom, meet with the PTA, meet with the union leadership, things like that. And then we get a feel for whether or not that's the first feel of whether or not this person will really start to fit in here. Another district visit that you can and that you should conduct, in my opinion, again, my philosophy is leave no stone unturned, is for the board to visit the candidates district. Can't be a quorum or more than the board, so you'd have to select representatives, but a candidate often finds that to be a great day for the board as well, where you can see what their A game is, right? You can see, they've been telling you how wonderful their school district is. You get to see, is that really wonderful based on what I can see? You're not going to get the full picture, of course, but you know, as well as I do, that when you walk into a school or a school district, there's a certain culture that you can pick up on, and that's important. I think that that is something that you should talk about doing, okay? And that's, you know, I think you guys have enough time to do all of these. You'll know as the process goes along. And then after that, you begin contract negotiations, and you send your contract to the county superintendent for approval, and then you vote to appoint in public, okay? Altogether, that's a pretty comprehensive timeline, but said right here at the bottom of the slide, do not let the timeline drive the process, okay? Any questions on this business? I know this is a lot. Okay. Have a sample calendar written here. Knowing that you'll need somebody on July the 1st, I kind of worked it backwards with all of the different steps that we advise. So if you were, I'm here, it's November, okay, so you guys are starting really early. But this could be driven along depending on the pool of candidates that you get. And this is an attractive place to work, so I'd imagine you get a high quality pool. You could start as late as February, really. And you'll see all these dates here, but I also want to keep in mind, if you look at this calendar, you'll see a lot of March in here, and we know what goes on in March, right? It's the budget, so you'll be putting in a lot of time. If you advance this up to January, then we would change March, I suppose, to February, which is a short month. But if you look at this calendar and you say, wow, that's a lot of commitment, yeah, you're absolutely right. The visual's getting through. So there's quite a few steps, and you'll be staying late, and you'll be meeting an awful lot. You'll be doing a lot of advertising, but this is really the optimal way of approaching the most important decision that you will make as a board member, okay? So it can be done. Any questions on this? Yes? Yes, the packet was from our workshop session. So when I knew I was presenting in Clifton, I kind of tinkered around with it and said, let me do something a little bit more realistic for Clifton. Absolutely, sure. I'll send you all a copy of this PowerPoint for your records. Okay. All right, let's talk about criteria, okay? I touched on this before. Your first conversation is what the board's vision is for the new person. Doesn't have to be a tremendously long conversation, because what we're really getting at is professional experience, areas of expertise, their leadership and professional qualities, and what type of level of education you want. Under professional experience, we're talking about numbers. How long do you think this person should have been in administrative positions? Do they need to have been a superintendent before, or will you entertain someone who had a central office position? Will you entertain someone who has been a principal before? This is a large district. This has a lot of schools. I think, you know, could a principal be up for that job? I don't know. That's something you guys have to talk about. You probably will wind up requesting someone with some superintendent experience. How many years, right? That's a question that the board needs to answer. Also, what types of districts are you looking for? That might not make the advertisement that you're looking for a district that's exactly like Clifton, or that has this particular concerns, but it's something that you should know at the outset, right? This is a unique place, and there's a lot of people who can do a superintendent's job for a district this size, but there's only there's a narrow pool of who can do the job for Clifton. And I can't tell you that. You can tell that after going through your candidates, right? Then start thinking about areas of expertise. What do you want to highlight? It's a big job, and there's a lot of facets to it, and you want someone to be good in just about all of them, but where do they really need to shine? Do they need to be excellent communicators? Do they need to be creative budgeters, right? Do they need to have experience in special education, in multilingual populations? What do you want as far as the most important areas of expertise? Because we can't list all of that in one advertisement. So you pick out, let's say, 3 or 4 of your biggest examples. And leadership professional qualities, right? Do you want someone who develops leaders under them? Do you want someone who is, has a whole child approach? What do you want? And that's something that the board will decide also. And also, you may have a non-negotiable. Some districts request a doctorate. It narrows the pool somewhat. I don't see that so often, but it's out there, and it's a question that the board should answer before you advertise. And once you do have that initial conversation, we can start writing your advertisement. This is just a pretty basic template, but it is actually successful. There's a few good elements to it. If you notice, we mention what type of district it is for this hypothetical, the grade levels. This one's a pre-K to 12. We always mention the amount of budget they've got. You mention how many kids are in there and how many school buildings are in there. You may even want to, as this particular ad did, delineate, what the grade levels are in each school, but I don't know if that would work for Clifton. We've got like 17 buildings. You'd be paying a lot in advertising if you decide to do that. But what is also super important are the qualifications. That first line, New Jersey School Administrator Certificate or Certificate of Eligibility required, non-negotiable. You need to put that in your advertisements. You really shouldn't be entertaining someone who's not going to have that certificate. Did you have a question there, Larry?
Yes, as well as with the students, would you also consider
Yes, that's an excellent point, sure. And districts have done that. Also keep in mind with the internet, you're going to get a lot of hits on your website, and that's going to be really a premier source for information about the district for anyone who's interested. So now let's go down to that second bullet point. This particular ad lists the amount of experience as required. And, that's a heavy word. Because once you say required, you have to stick to that. If you fall in love with a candidate who had 2.5 years experience for this Your Town district, right, or Epic district, or whatever the heck they call themselves, they really can't, the interview process should go no further. Because someone who had 2.5 years of experience and didn't apply for it because they saw the word required may have some kind of a cause to be disgruntled if you wind up hiring someone whose resume only has 2 years of experience in that particular position. So you need to protect yourselves. What's a better word, perhaps, is preferred. You know, it may be a non-negotiable for the board as you're going into the situation, but seeing your candidates, you may have wished you would use the word preferred, because that gives you more flexibility. But it does give you the opportunity to say, look, these are the people that we really are interested. Also, you're going to want to put there the salary is commensurate with education and experience, subject to regulations. You don't want to put a number in there, obviously. Do want to put when the position is available, on or after July the 1st, and a deadline for all of your receipt of applications, okay? Now, these parts, I will tell you this is kind of, it depends on the approach that the board wants to take. In my slideshow here, we have the board criteria, then we write the ad, then we go out to the staff and community for criteria. These two are interchangeable, writing the ad either before or after getting input from your stakeholders. Because you may come up with some valuable points from those sessions where you engage your stakeholders that you want to add to your advertisement. However, keep in mind, you're going to get a lot of input from your stakeholders, and there's no way you're going to be able to put all of that in an advertisement. No one's going to read it, and it's going to be as expensive as can be if you decide to do it that way, and it's just going to look a little weird. But you do need to use your stakeholders' preferences and their visions for the district as part of your process, right? So what is typical is to invite your different stakeholder groups to an input session in person where a facilitator can ask each group the same questions about perhaps the strengths and weaknesses of the district, where they see the district headed, what do they want to see preserved here, what would they like to be improved upon. You can write the script if you're doing it yourself. If you have a facilitator, that script is probably already written. And you want to ask the same questions of each group, and you do want to maintain some measure of confidentiality for your staff and for your administrators. They do need the ability to speak very freely. Your public input sessions should be open to all. But with today's busy schedules and, you know, people want to come and want to participate, but they can't make it on one particular night or one of the 3 particular nights that you've delineated, or the morning session or the evening session, a survey, an online survey, is a very attractive option and should be something that you consider. And you'll get excellent input from that. Once you get all of that stuff down and you are determining what your community wants, then we'll know what kind of interview questions need to be asked, what areas do you need to focus on. You may be thinking that, you know, diversity is something that should be a strength in your candidate, but your community may say, nope, communication is more important, so you spend more time asking questions about communication than diversity, perhaps. Yes?
Everybody has a very crazy schedule.
Yes.
Is it possible to send 1 or 2 board members to each school when they have their HASA or parent night and get input that way instead of everybody trying to make it one night to our board meeting?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, Gary. You really do. In a district this big, you can't do it in one night. You really can't. What might be a good strategy for this board and for this district is to, you know, you can't do like 17 different sessions. You'll never get done. You'll be exhausted. Is
But it doesn't
to...
have to be the whole board, that's what I'm saying. Can I say 2 to 3 people, pick 3 schools, everybody splits the district, and then those are your dates, so you have your forum at that school.
Yeah.
And try to do it.
You can do that.
On top of
Yeah.
our online survey, which will be.
Sure.
given to everybody.
You can do that, and actually, you should do it that way. You should not send the whole board out. If you're not using a consultant. If you're using a consultant, let the consultant do it, because you'll get a freer exchange of ideas most likely that way. But if you are using the board, don't send more than a quorum, because then you got to advertise and do all of that stuff. And if you're trying to conduct an input session from staff or admin, you get a quorum of the board there, that's an open public meeting. You'll get, you know, and the message will get muddled because, yeah. So, I mean, that's something that, you know, you need to have a plan for going forward. And it can be done, and it can be done well, but definitely the less, you know, it would be clunky with the whole board anyway. And if you are conducting those interview sessions, those input sessions yourselves, you're going to have to come up with a smooth and delineated agenda for that, right? So ideally, one of the board contingent should be the facilitator, and the other board members can perhaps take notes or, depending on how you want to do it. But it's the most important thing really is that your stakeholders feel that they have an opportunity to freely exchange information with the board, whether it's through a facilitator or with the board themselves. You'll know what's best. The surveys really are gaining in popularity, and you can see why, because they do offer a measure of anonymity, and they're convenient, right? You leave it open for 2 weeks, and I actually did, my last search, we had a big input session set up. It was a beautiful spring day. It was the first nice day after this awful winter. One person showed. We offered the survey afterwards. I had over 250 responses. So the board did the right thing, and it's something to consider. Okay. Here's actually kind of a way that you might want to do this with the input sessions. You could kind of split this between the schools or between the grade levels. Have, the morning crowd come in, have the office staff come in at another time. Just have yourselves, whoever you send, or your consultant or your board members, be in that school all day, all right? Because your teachers, your admin, your office staff, you don't want to make them come out to another. It's important to them. They don't all live locally. You want to be good hosts. And you will get more attendance, really. It's not even just a matter of being nice and us. You want as much information as you can, so you bring it to them. The PTA, of course, is an important element, but oftentimes boards feel fine with having the PTA join the community input sessions, and that's perfectly fine as well. You'll know better than me. Okay, we've talked about this stuff, national, statewide advertisement. Generally, when you do an online advertisement, it's pretty easy to get them on these particular websites, colleges, county offices, professional organizations. And when you choose, if you choose a consultant, they're probably doing this already. I know we are. Like we have, we send it to all different states and this and that. Any questions from, I'm doing so much talking. Any other questions besides Gary's at this point? Okay, all right. So the fun part, we've kind of talked to this. The application materials, what I want you to consider, there's different approaches to this. Some vendors kind of pre-screen the applicants for you. Other vendors let you have every single piece of information that comes into the board, okay? Which one do you want? It's a personal preference, okay? But it's a question that the whole board should be able to answer. Yes, Larry? We give you everything. We give you everything. Yes, Frank?
Typically, how many people in the pool will you get for a search like this?
For a search like this, I'd expect, depending on how long we advertise for, but not, I'd expect, I don't mean to, there's no way of saying, but I'd expect somewhere between 40 and 50. Because it's a nice, it's a great district to work in, really. And I'd expect that on the high end, but we'll see. Now, you always get people who apply who simply are not qualified, And you'll always get people who apply that I'll look at and I'll go, not this one again, honestly. But you will definitely get a quality top tier of candidates that you'll have to wade through. And if you're not getting that, then that's a discussion that we need to have. Like, why are we not getting better candidates? Maybe we have to increase, and when I say we, I mean the board. Maybe we need to increase our scope of advertising. Maybe there's something else that we need to look at. Maybe we need to put a more positive face on the district in social media, and there's all different conversations to have. I don't know if you'll need to get there. I think this is a very attractive place to work. Okay. All right, so once you've gone through all of your materials that you care to go through, whether it's the entire scope of everybody who's applied or just a narrowed pool as determined by your consultant, we start talking about interviews, right? Techniques and questions and all of that. So sticking with this. I would just, basically, for your first interview, you're probably going to want to make that a quickie, right? 30 minutes to 45 max. You'll also need to have a buffer time in between interviews. The last thing you want is someone coming in while the other person is going out. You need to avoid that. You need to appoint someone to be kind of a doorkeeper, right? Someone who will be a host, who will be waiting for your next appointment, who will be able to usher them into a comfortable room where they will not be seeing who else is being considered for the job. It's not a doctor's office waiting room situation here. Once that person is in, you will ask the same questions. This is a best practice of each candidate. You inform the candidate at the beginning of the session. Whoever's presiding, the board president typically, will say, we're happy you're here. We're looking to spend about 30, 40 minutes with you. We have 8 questions, and then you go. Now, if the candidate is done answering your questions in 15 minutes, they are done. Don't start rooting around for extra questions to fill the time. That tells you something about the way they work and the way they think. If you go rooting around for other questions because you're all sitting there awkwardly, it's not fair to the candidates who come behind them, because you're finding out more about this person than the people who you have either interviewed prior or were interviewed later in the first round. So that's something that you need to be aware of. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with saying, thank you for your 15 minutes, we're all done, we'll be in touch. It's perfectly okay. If, however, you've got, on the other side of the coin, you've got someone, you said, we'll be here for 30 minutes, and it's, 28 minutes into the thing, and you're only answering the 3rd question out of 8, well, that's kind of telling you something about them as well. Don't give them extra time, okay? Don't. It's not fair to the other candidates. You may have a line waiting. It's not a good practice to give any kind of preferential treatment between one and the other candidate, especially in the first interview. How is the second interview different? Second interview, I would not advise going by the same script for everybody. There's certainly some basic questions that you'll want to ask of everybody. But in the first interview, I'm certain that there will be interesting points made by each of the candidates that you will want to explore more. And that is perfectly permissible, and it's actually your responsibility to start getting under the hood of those points that they made. Start exploring, asking them for a little bit more back and forth, something that tells you a little bit more about that individual, right? And then from there, it'll start to become evident who you want to have for a third interview. Some boards don't like the idea of a third interview. I caution any board that does not want to do it, that they're getting antsy. This candidate shone like a star, interview 1, interview 2. This is our guy. Why would we want to, keep interviewing when we know this is our person? No stone unturned, honestly. And oftentimes there are 2 or maybe even 3 people that you just can't decide on. Or maybe there's just not a majority opinion. A certain cadre likes this person, another one likes that person. The third interview should really bring it all home on who is the right person. Yes?
What interview would you consider asking more out-of-the-box questions?
I would start with the second interview. The third interview, or possibly the second, depending on how things go. Certainly one of those 2 should include a presentation by the candidate. There's different ways of doing that, but remember, this is the educational leader of the district. They're going to be speaking to the district. They're going to be giving presentations to the district, to your staff, to your admin. Got to be a good presenter, right? You want to see what their A game is, and the time to do that is in the interview. There's different approaches to the third interview as well. Some of them are just a complete free-for-all question and answer thing, and there's some benefits to that also. It really, it becomes more clear as you go through the process, right? It's a little nebulous right now for me to tell you what your third interview should look like. But it's, as you work through, you'll be able to tell. Okay? Yes? So you're talking about, just so that I know, about a board that brought out 2 finalists in front of the community?
Correct, and they did a presentation or a pitch to new stakeholders to kind of hold up.
Okay. There's different ways of thinking about that. But for me and for my association, we do not advise that at all. Because this is a board decision. This is what you're elected to do. And once you have 2 candidates in front of the community, almost guarantee you're dividing the community down the middle. Because you're going to have people who say, if you hire candidate A, the people who saw candidate B and fell in love with candidate B, they've got that sense of regret that you went with candidate A, and you're already coloring the relationship under certain tones right away. The other consideration, too, is that, I mean, I don't know, 80 times out of 83, these are professionals who already have a job, right? So I'm not quite sure how wise that is to put someone in front of the public knowing that that's going to affect their career if they are not chosen by the district. And that happened recently, you know, and it's difficult. So I wouldn't advise to do that. If the board does want to do something like that, you would certainly want to do that towards the very close of the process. But I'm glad you asked that question. I really, really, really advise against it. But it is your search. You know, if you do it yourself or with a consultant who will facilitate that, then, you know, it's certainly within your, there's no law against it, as you might want to say. Other questions on that? Thanks for the question, Fahim. That's good. Okay. All right, let's move on here. Okay. Just something to think about, because this will inform your choice from application to appointment, right? You'll need to ask for some kind of backup material. So naturally, you'll have an application, you'll have a letter of interest and resume. You'll ask for, you know, references are important. They often make the difference as to who's going to make that first round. If I see someone with a good reference letter from someone I really respect, that's pretty important. Performance evaluation, their most recent, at least one. But, you know, it's an interesting position as superintendent because boards change, right? So if you're, and sometimes a board comes in that's not very enamored of a superintendent, whereas the previous board thought that they were fantastic. So I would advise that you get at least 2 performance evaluations. At least 2, because the boards do, you know, they're a little fluid. You may want to ask for performance evaluations over X amount of years. Right? It depends. Video is kind of something that I haven't really seen for superintendents, but I know that school districts are asking for them for teachers sometimes, so you may want to ask for one. I know they ask for them on college applications these days, so it could be something interesting and illustrative, but it would be unusual. Transcripts, I do believe that you should ask for a transcript for anyone who says that they have a doctorate degree, just to make sure that you can verify that they obtained their doctorate from a credible institution. Every once in a while you hear a horror story about someone who said they had a level of education that they really don't. So you need to ensure that they do. And of course a copy of the administrator's certificate or the certificate of eligibility. Absolute non-negotiable, all right? I think we already talked to this, right? I got a little bit ahead of myself. Any questions on these first, second round, third round interviews? All right, very good. Okay, and then once you've got your finalists, you do your reference and your background checks. You do your district visits, and then you start the negotiations, right? Once you have some, it'll mainly, at this point, the show will be between the candidate's attorney and your attorney. There really isn't an awful lot of difference between contracts these days since the salary cap came up, but there are definitely negotiable items that you can offer and go back and forth with, and you'll need to have an idea as a board of what those will be, and you'll need to let your attorney know, and let the 2 attorneys, you know, go back and forth. It should not be a board member and the candidate speaking directly during contract negotiations. Any questions on those? All right. And then once, yes?
Typically, how long does it take the county superintendent to get back to you?
It depends on the county super, I think, you know how I said communication is key throughout? Well, especially with a district like Clifton, you should be reaching out, your board president should be reaching out to the county superintendent, letting them know we're starting the process. Is there anything that you would like us to know? And ask for a general turnaround time. They'll be able to inform you. I've had them done relatively quickly. I've checked the statute and code. There's no solid timeline that I could see, is no solid time limit, so it is kind of flexible. But this is a big district. It's in everybody's interest to get the right person appointed quickly. I think this would be a priority item. But at that, same amount of time, God, if you're doing it in March, I think they're kind of busy, with all the budgets. So it's just something that you need to be aware of. You have plenty of time. You really are doing your due diligence right now, starting to think about this at this point for July 1st appointment. You're doing well. And then after you get your approval, then appointment. What is appointment exactly? Well, it's voting on your superintendent in public as part of an agenda item, and you introduce to your community. And that should be a really exciting meeting, honestly. That should have a celebratory feel to it. And as far as introducing your superintendent to district stakeholders, it shouldn't just be that one meeting. Your superintendent should visit the schools. You can have a community open house night, coffee with the superintendent. There's a million different ways of doing this, and they're all pretty terrific, honestly, because it's just a great feeling to get somebody who says yes to Clifton and who Clifton says yes to back. It's a shining moment for you. You will put in a lot of work, trust me, and you will be proud of whomever you put in there. So now's the time for celebrating. Okay? Other things to know about the selection. We have to pass the trash requirements that are in place. You guys, luckily, the district's already been doing it with your current staff. You follow the same procedures. It's pretty straightforward, believe it or not. On the state's website, there's a form that you send out, and there's frequently asked questions. I know we're really getting ahead of ourselves here, but that is something that you need to be aware of. Your attorney can actually handle that for you. Calling references provided I spoke to, but also calling references that are not provided. Somewhere in the application process, you've got to have some kind of an authorization that allows the board to check references that are not provided by the candidate. As a courtesy, however, you don't start calling references after the first interview, especially people that they haven't provided. Okay? You don't even start that after the second interview. You do that after the third interview, in my opinion, and you also should place a call to the candidate and say, you are one of our absolute finalists, or you are our finalist, however you want, however much information you want to divulge and however clear it's looking, and then say, we're going to start the reference check. I would advise asking for one reference for each board member to call from the candidate. And then I would also remind them that check that particular box, that you're able to call a wider scope than those whom they have provided with you. But is there anyone that you would not like us to call? I think that's an important question for a few reasons. I think it's courteous, first of all, but also it's illustrative, the type of answer that they give. And if they do have someone that they don't want you to call, that's not a yellow light automatically. Because let's face it, in this business, you make enemies, right? You do. And is it any good for you to call someone who absolutely cannot stand your finalist? Not quite sure. Not quite sure. You'll cross that bridge when you come to it. But some of the references that you should look for after you get the green light from the candidate is, let's say the CPAG representative, your PTA presidents, law enforcement in their former town where they've lived, perhaps colleagues in their county. The internet just makes this a lot easier, but actually, shoot a lot of blanks. So we want to have a nice comprehensive list so that everyone on the board talks to at least 2 people. That's my philosophy. Again, leave that no stone unturned thing. And then we mentioned the districts and the visit to their district, visit to your district. Any questions on those? All right. And then this is in your packets, but like I mentioned, there's a pretty plain vanilla contract out there that was developed by not just us, but by NJASA that kind of takes care of everything that needs to be taken care of for most districts, but there are negotiable items in there. And, it is something that you'll want to talk to the board about and the attorney. Clarity, there's no substitution for clarity. The last thing you want is for, some board members to say, well, I didn't know this was in the contract when you're ready to vote on it. So make sure that everyone on the board is informed about the contract as possible before you vote on it. And we do have, our labor relations can help you with that too, if you need our help. All right. Once you've appointed your superintendents in place, it's the transition time. We've talked a little bit about this, about introducing your new educational leader to the community. But the other thing, too, that I would like for you to consider is to have a board retreat with your new superintendent. I know Clifton does very well with the board retreat, so I don't think that this is a shocker or a hard sell for you, where you kind of sit down together in a more casual atmosphere and we start to determine, again, no substitute for clarity, what your roles and responsibilities are as board members, as superintendent. Those are already delineated, so we just want to get them out in black and white so everybody understands. But also, what communication norms can we expect from each other? Because I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, problems between boards and superintendents that I've had, it comes down to communication. So if we take that step in the beginning and say, what are our communication norms going forward, it really saves you so much trouble and it keeps that good relationship going. And I can facilitate that for you whether you go with us or not. It's part of my job. I want to see you succeed, right? You're my board. You're my board. Board superintendent relationships are a big deal. And so I am pleased to come out. You should probably do that within, 90 days of appointment. You certainly don't want to do it in the midst of back to school and all that stuff. There's a lot. If you've just hired somebody on July the 1st, you really can't do it with them until they're hired. So we could work together to kind of find a good date, typically a Saturday or something like that. Doesn't have to be long, but we've got some real good documentation that you can rely on to keep that relationship solidified and productive going forward. It all comes down to no surprises, right? It all comes down to no surprises. So this is our little graphic. I think we've hit on all of this, right? In the past, you are going to be evaluating your superintendent on their project towards district goals. That's something that you typically set in the summertime, but you'll probably want to do that a little bit later in your case once you have your superintendent going. But it's all that typical cycle, right? You establish your goals collaboratively. You'll ask for regular report outs on that. You'll fill out your superintendent evaluation in accordance with the timeline that you need to get it all done by July 1st of next year. And you'll also do the board self-evaluation, which is really the other side of the evaluative piece. And if you keep that going, you'll be ahead of the game. You'll be solidifying a relationship that hopefully will last for many years and will be productive, not just for the board and for the superintendent, but for your staff, and most importantly for your children and their families. So it's a lot. It's a lot on you, but it can be done. It's done successfully from the top of the state to the bottom. We've seen success stories, and we've seen lessons that you can learn from. And I'm happy to share those with you. Because like I said, you're my district. Whether you contract with New Jersey school boards or not, I am here for you. Okay? I don't have my little Q question slide, but are there any other questions that I have not yet covered? Okay. I have left for everybody a copy of our literature. on the superintendent search process. You probably, after having gone through all of this material just now, you'll probably want to focus on page 5 when you're determining whether or not school boards would be your vendor. And what I would focus you on is the two middle programs, really. The difference between the two of them, they offer a great level of support. For the 12-5, I'm typically present for all of your interviews, but I don't have to be. It's just something that we offer that oftentimes candidates or boards feel is good. But I also would do a preliminary interview of candidates that interest me as I go through the pool of candidates before I deliver them to you. And then when I deliver the pool of candidates, I can say, look, these 10 are really they were outstanding to me, so I talked to them and I did a preliminary interview and here are the results. Whether you want to pursue those 10, a completely different 10, 5 of those, and it might not even be 10, it might be 17, it might be 4, I don't really know, we'll see what happens. It's your search, so you can ask me to interview more people, or you can ask, you can say, look, we want to talk to someone who you haven't talked to right out of the box. I will take as much time as you need for that. The other things too is like I do help develop interview questions throughout, but I'll do that for any of the programs that you choose. And we have, labor training and all of that stuff. We review your job description, things like that. It's all in this matrix. So if you have questions, by all means, ask me. You may have questions after tonight, I'm sure, and you know how to reach me. But are there any questions that jump out at you now about the NJSBA search process? Yes, Larry.
Actually, my question is to the board secretary, to the president. We have sent out the RFP for a search process for the superintendent.
That's correct. It's being opened Tuesday.
Yeah, and we'll be responding to that. So, other questions or? I know there was a lot of information, but I really do appreciate the opportunity to address you. Thank you so in this beautiful space. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Oh, clapping. You're so welcome. And happy Thanksgiving to all of you also. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you again. I just want to reiterate that we are on target and we're doing the right thing, especially with the RFPs going out so early. So I know I'll be talking to you a lot.
Yeah, kudos. You are doing well.
Thank you. Okay, motion to adjourn, please. Motion by Mr. Casper, second by Commissioner Avodrabo. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Adjourned.